At DDI, we turn data-driven insights into dynamic leadership development, unlocking potential, sparking growth, driving performance, because better leaders create a better future.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 in our assessment series, The Ugly Truth, Why Leadership Assessments Fail and What to Do About It. A few housekeeping tips before we begin. You can find today's slides and part 1 of this series in the additional resources section of your console. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive the link to watch on demand later today. The attendee chat feature is open, and we encourage your comments and responses. And I see them all coming in now, so thank you. To submit a question to our presenters, please use the presenter questions box to the right of the slides. And now let's bring in today's presenters, Vice President of DDI's Professional Services, Kevin Tamanini, and DDI Managing Consultant, Scott Bryant. Welcome, Kevin and Scott. We're excited to get started today.
Thanks, Kim. And hi, everyone. Welcome to our second session in this series of webinars that we're doing around unpacking assessments in the world of leadership development and talent decisions. If you were not able to join our last session, I would strongly encourage you to take a listen to the recording called All Guts, No Data, and Why Your Leaders Need Assessments Now. We really dug into some of the reasons as to why you all are facing challenges with getting assessments into your organization. And similar to our last session, if we just use the number of people who registered for this session, as well as the growing number of people who are joining today's session, clearly you are hungry to hear more on this very hot topic around assessments and how they can drive success within your organization. And so as Kim mentioned, my name is Kevin Tamanini. I'm the Vice President for Professional Services in our North American operation. I have the opportunity of leading our consulting, project management, customer success, and other teams that are responsible for the design, the implementation, and the delivery of value to our customers. I'm pleased to be joined today by Scott Bryant, one of our managing consultants in our consulting organization. And one of the things I wanted to share with you is that both Scott and I have been working with many organizations over a long period of time on various uses of assessments within their organization. Sometimes it's been high volume leadership selection. Sometimes it's been large scale leadership development programs. Could be high stakes programs for accelerating high potential leaders within the organization, as well as providing insights to boards around both their current as well as next generation C-suite leaders. And both of us have extensive experience on the planning and design, the implementation, execution, and ultimately the storytelling through data to engage our customers, to share with them the value that assessments can provide as a critical component to the success of the initiatives that they're looking to drive. And today, what we're going to share with you is a little bit more about what we have seen around why assessments fail within organizations, what it creates within the organization, and what success can look like when it's done properly, so that the intent that we know all of you have around building better leaders can actually be materialized and manifested within your organization. And so one of the things that we wanted to do before we got into the details of that particular topic was share with you a couple of snapshots that came out of our last session, where we talked about the challenges that you all are facing with even getting assessments into the organization. So we positioned this polling question to our audience, and we gave you all an opportunity to respond to us with what are the challenges that you're facing to get assessments into the organization. And the results were really interesting from our perspective. 75% indicated that the leaders within your organization just didn't have the ability to evaluate skills, capabilities, competencies, and they weren't good at it, or they weren't good enough at doing what you needed them to be doing. About 50% also selected either the personalization around development or the use of assessments were leading to lack of assessments was leading to poor decisions. Both of these are related to the ability of assessments to provide objectivity, specificity, and focus that can really help to drive and inform decisions, whether it's from a hiring perspective or from a development perspective. And in high potential programs, tends to be one of those things that we see customers target through training and development alone. And so it wasn't surprising to us to see this as a challenge, that the use of assessments can really help to provide targeted insights to accelerate those high potential leaders. What I found particularly interesting on this one, though, was the lowest rated item was around the faith that executives had in the data for informing talent decisions. And I think this is a really important insight that came out of our last session, because what it's saying is, for the most part, your senior leaders have confidence when having data available to them to help inform decisions that they're making. This is really fascinating, because you know that from a revenue perspective, from a market penetration perspective, your executives would never make decisions based upon their gut. They would use data that's available to them, and making the same types of decisions on talent should be no different than that. And I'll come back to that in a little bit, because I think that's an important topic for us to discuss about the buy-in that these senior executives need to have in order to make these successful within the organization. One of the other interesting questions that we posed to our last audience was, what does an assessment mean to you? We talked about this idea that training and development tends to be a pretty consistently shared understanding. Training tends to be a session that you can go to get insights about a particular topic, practice that topic, and then identify where you can bring it back to your job. Assessments, though, was very varied. There was inconsistency around how people thought about assessments and how they applied them. And so we asked the question, and what we created here was a word cloud based upon the insights that you all shared as participants in that last session. And you can see a lot of things that are popping up here. Identifying strengths, measurements of success, better talent decisions, informing development plans, facts and data. So this was really helpful for us, because I think the opportunity that's in front of us is to try to figure out, how do we create a more consistent, a more shared definition of what assessments are, so that when we do go to implement them, there's an easier pathway to get buy-in, to get commitment, and to get utilization of what these tools are. As the market leader in this space, we have an opportunity to define what that definition is for you. And we'll come to back to that a little bit later in this, after we've shared some successes and some challenges that we've faced along the way when working with other customers. As I mentioned, this was just one of a series of webinars that we're doing. These are pretty quick hits. And this idea of assessments is a pretty meaty topic, as I think many of you do already know. And so our next session that's going to be coming up in August 26th, is focusing on how HR has an opportunity to leverage data to inform not just revenue forecasting, but talent forecasting, talent decisions. And this is similar to that theme I just shared with you around executives are already looking for this data to inform their insights. So tune into that session later on in August. And all of these sessions that we're doing now, these webinars, are opportunities to feed into our conference that's happening in November. Our Better Leaders Summit is an opportunity for us to go into deep dive working sessions. We have many customers that are joining these sessions that we'll be sharing some of their own stories along the way, successes that they've had, challenges that they've encountered, and barriers. So this is an opportunity for a forum of a community of interest in these topics. And I'd encourage you to take a look at the information that's available in this webinar series about that session itself and what other topics are going to be available there. So as we get into it, I'm going to turn over the keys now to Scott to talk a little bit more about today's topic and what we have seen from different situations on why assessments fail within organizations. So Scott, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And welcome everyone. I am going to start with a poll. And so I'm launching a poll now. And that poll question for you is, why do assessments fail in your organization? We're really interested in what your personal experience is. Again, like most all of our polls, this is a select all that apply sort of situation. And we have queued up some of the usual suspects for you, right? So you might be experiencing too many tools, too much clutter there. You might be experiencing budget constraints. Maybe there's a lot of data, but not many next steps. You might have leaders that are skeptical about how the data is going to be used. And of course, if you're seeing other reasons why assessments are failing for you, feel free to post those in the chat. we've got a good number of responses coming in. We're sort of into triple digits now, so that's great. Give you another maybe 15, 20, 25 seconds to respond. Want to make sure we get a lot of good data here. Just a second, we're going to share with you our top 3 based on our experience, but we really wanted to get from you what you're experiencing, and also share that with you, sort of what the collective view is. There were just about 45%. I would love to get 50% of you in here. So we're just about there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you the results. We're just top 50%, so that's perfect. So as we look at this, let's sort of look at this data. So a lot of data, but not many next steps. I think that's the leader in the clubhouse, right? So that's one that's garnering a lot of votes. Sort of mixed amongst the rest. So yeah, interesting. So we're definitely, the good news is a lot of data and not many next steps made our top 3. So we're going to talk about that one explicitly in just a couple of minutes. So let me show you the top 3 that we had based on our sort of collective experience. The first is throwing tools at the problem. So this is the problem of sort of clutter, organizations that have too many assessments. The second one is the one that you sort of picked, all assessment and no action. And the third one is leadership support. So do leaders support assessments? Do they sponsor assessments, et cetera? So those are the 3 that we're going to take a bit of a deep dive in. I'm going to walk you through each of those in terms of both where we see the problems occurring, and then just as we promised, what you can do about it. And along the way, Kevin, I'm going to invite you in to sort of comment and provide some perspective as well. So let's jump into the first one, throwing tools at the problem. And so when we have a lot of different tools in our system, what we lose is focus. And sometimes it's not that we're throwing tools at the problem, but we're just allowing tools to proliferate. Can't tell you the number of organizations that I've worked with that when they started looking around, they were astonished to the number of assessments that were being used across the organization, many without formal sanction of the talent or people organizations. So we sort of lose that focus, and that means it's going to be really hard for us to consistently roll tools out. We sort of lose grasp of governance, what the assessment purpose is, what the data sharing policy is, communication, et cetera. Now, if you're experiencing this, what you're probably seeing is a lot of data in the system, but that data doesn't fit together. It doesn't talk to each other. It doesn't complement each other. So it's just disparate data points. We also see in the second bullet points, probably a really big one, misused assessments. And so people in the organization, they're picking up assessment many times with the best of intentions, but they're using it for the wrong purpose. The tool wasn't designed to do that. All of those things create confusion, mistrust, frustration. In many cases, when our internal customers are frustrated, they go look for another assessment, and that means there's more assessment clutter in our system. And so with this phenomenon, you'll also see a lot of assessments start with a bang, a lot of enthusiasm, but then fizzle quickly. So let's get to the solution, and I'll take half a step backwards as we talk about the solution. The number one recommendation that I would have is ask this question with any assessment. Why are we using this assessment? What problem are we trying to solve? That should be a litmus test for every assessment. Is it fit for that purpose? Now, in our last webinar, as Kevin referenced, we talked about 3 things that assessments are almost always focused on, one of these 3 things, either measuring current performance, future potential, or readiness for a future role. Now, the key here is these are 3 very different targets, and we have to disentangle those. They are often conflated together. Our advice would be use that as an anchor point to build your assessment strategy. And that's probably the biggest recommendation. Build an assessment strategy. Have an overarching purpose. Here's why we're using assessment. Here's what we want them to do, and have some governance around that. Now, I've worked with a number of organizations over time. I'm working with one right now to take that assessment strategy a step further and build what we're calling an assessment playbook. An assessment playbook is sort of a practical guide to how we use the assessment strategy. So it's a resource that the organization can use, and it really tells the organization, here are the assessments that we have in our assessment universe. Here is what their right uses are. Here are some use cases that you can use to sort of test your scenario. Here's how you initiate those and what's required to use them properly. So that can be a really important tool to make sure that you are, as those last two bullets say, creating a consistent framework that defines what good leadership is. So it's your competency model is going to be critical to your assessment strategy. And then you're building and evaluating all of your tools around that framework and your strategic purpose. So let me stop there for a second. Kevin, if you have any comments, I'm welcome you to join in.
Yeah, I was just going to share an example of a customer situation that I worked with where a customer, when we came in, they said, we have a lot of assessments, but what it turned into was pretty much each leader had something that they had experienced at a different organization that they brought into the table because it gave them insights. And their question to me was, well, how many should we have? And so they were focusing on two different levels of leadership. And so what we did was we said, well, let's talk about what it is you're looking to measure. And then what are the right tools to measure those things to give you insights and data on those areas? And so what we ultimately did was we created basically like a 2-year journey, 3-year journey for a leader. If they were to come in, they were to use these tools from a selection perspective because it covered certain targets. They would then go through a program for onboarding and development, and then they go through a 360 down the road because that was going to give them some reflection back on other targets that were different than what they needed to be focusing on initially. And then when they stepped into the next role, same pieces. So it's not just there's not a magic number of how many assessments is too many or too little. It comes down to what are you looking to get insights about from these individuals, and then what's the right tool to use for what purpose, as Scott was mentioning earlier. And ultimately that creates kind of a leadership journey for people through an organization. And when you structure that in a way that creates a framework and a strategy, then it makes sense to both the participants that are going through as leaders themselves, as well as decision makers on where is this person in their journey with our organization, and what should we be thinking about using with them next to get the next type of insight.
Appreciate that, Kevin. Yeah, great examples there. While we can't give you a number, what I would stress is, as with most strategies, simpler is better. More assessments is not always more value. Let's go to the next one. This was our top vote getter here in the poll today. So all assessment and no action. And so look, even when we have the right assessments in place, they're aligned to our purpose, assessments can only do so much. By themselves, assessments don't solve the problems that we're trying to solve for. They give us data, they give us insight, they give us perspective, but the value that we get from assessments is really predicated on the action that we take. So this is a really, really critical one. Basically, what I tell organizations, and this is a bit of a hard line, right, is if you're not prepared to take action, then don't do the assessment. It's kind of like an employee survey. If you do an employee survey, you get a bunch of feedback and don't act on it, you're in a worse position than if you'd never done the survey. Take your high potential leader that you want to grow. If you take that person and give them a really robust, rigorous assessment that gives them great data, but then the organization isn't prepared to really support their development, allow them to stretch, provide them opportunities, you might be in a worse position than if you had never done the assessment. So taking action is really critical. If you don't take action, this is what that leads to. It leads to disillusionment, frustration, disengagement, all the things that we're trying to avoid. Now, how do we remedy that? Number one is build action into your assessment strategy. I reference the assessment playbook, right? Build taking action into that playbook. I'm going to visit a client next Tuesday and going to sit in a room with the senior leadership team, and we're going to talk about 30 of their high potential leaders that have just gone through a pretty rigorous assessment. We're going to spend half a day together. Now, part of that time, we're going to look at the data, look at the aggregate insights. Was that data telling us? But very importantly, probably more than half that time is going to be spent action planning. Action has to be built into your purpose. And your assessment playbook should say things like, why are we using the assessment? What's required after the assessment? And it should be explicit enough to advise your internal customers, if you don't have the capacity or the inclination to follow up on this, maybe we should think of another pathway to address the issue that you're trying to address. So I'll stop there, Kevin, and see if you have any comments.
Yeah, I was going to share another customer example that when I was working with a larger healthcare organization, this was our IT group within, and they had a focus on trying to accelerate a core group of leaders. And what you end up doing is the assessment experience they went through is a development experience in and of itself. That you can learn a lot, especially as you get a feedback and insights from the initial data. But that's not enough. There needs to be something else that went along with it. And they did a good job of an individual development plan where they met with the leader. But we then came back a year later to the same group, and there were so many people that was it. So they didn't get anything beyond just the short-term outcomes and reflections from the assessment. There was no midterm and longer term. So I think part of this is think about sustainability of behavior change in people and insights as they're trying to grow. So you're using assessment for development in this case. Great. That takes time for that to materialize. And you can do a quick hit with the assessment data, feedback, some initial coaching. So think about short-term, midterm, and long-term post the assessment that can help to continue to reinforce insights that they gained from the tool, as well as what they've done to make sure that they're shifting and changing their behavior and learning new things along the way.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Let's sort of hit our last topic, and we'll be on time even, perhaps. So it starts and stops with leadership. Leadership sponsorship is critical for assessment to really sustain in the organization. So some of the sort of problems here are if your leaders don't understand the value of assessment, and perhaps they only see the cost of assessment. If they're skeptical, then your budget's probably precarious around assessment. This certainly connects to one of our previous categories, and these all three kind of connect together. One of the biggest reasons that you don't see action is because you don't have buy-in from the leaders. They are often the catalyst for that action actually happening in the organization. And if you don't have buy-in, your budget's going to be precarious. Your accountability systems are going to be fragile. You're probably going to measure success based on activity as opposed to outcomes. And everyone's going to become disillusioned and frustrated. So let's talk about remedies for this one. And here I will give you kind of three things that I think are critical to get leadership buy-in. One is executive sponsorship, especially if we're talking about an enterprise-wide assessment strategy. You must have executive and old enough to say that sponsorship has to be HRO. That's table stakes. Executives in that who sees a sponsor talked about it during a call. Positive there. Secondly is communication and education. This is early, often, and continuously. You really have to continually communicate about the value of your assessment. This is a journey, not a destination. You will never be finished with the communication and education piece of this. And the last piece that I'll mention is measurement. Over time, if you aren't gathering proof of the value that you are delivering to the organization, then that leadership, buy-in, sponsorship, engagement is going to wane. So figure out a multi-method approach to how you're going to show proof of value. DDI has a very good survey-based impact evaluation study that really zeroes in on where we can show behavior change and value to the organization. To me, even that isn't enough. You've got to augment that with other data coming from your systems, your bench strength, your succession slates, your internal promotions, et cetera. So sponsorship, communication, education, and measurement. Kevin, I'll let you comment and then turn it back over to you.
I think it's a great point, the role that not only senior executives play, but even the leaders that will be directly tied to participants going through this, their buy-in is really essential. And I think that Scott hit upon something else there that's critical, which is understanding how would they define and talk about what it is these people are going to be going through. So one of the things that I think is important for us to be keeping in mind is we believe that assessments are focused on scientifically and systematically measuring individuals' leadership capabilities. And this helps to provide information and insight around how those leaders are going to behave and function in real-world leadership settings. That idea of understanding this is a tool to help give us insights. Scott mentioned this, when we use these things effectively, when we use these tools, these assessments effectively, and when we're able to use multiple methods based upon what we're focusing on, it gives us valid, reliable predictions around performance. It gives us actionable insights that we can take immediate action on, and it helps to inform not only the capabilities of today, but tomorrow's business challenges. And that's a really important aspect around how are we defining assessments for these people moving forward. I mentioned to you, I know we're coming up on time, I mentioned to you a little bit earlier that this was one of a series of events that we're going to be focusing on. I mentioned that our next webinar is on August 26th, all feeding into our conference, our Better Leaders Summit in November. I'd also ask for you to continue to let us know what are those things that are top of mind for you. As we continue to refine our series, we want to be able to come back and share with you insights that are going to be most relevant to challenges that you're facing on a regular basis. And so what I'll leave you with before we wrap up is some of those are the additional topics that we will be covering at that summit. And you can see here, focusing on assessments as game changers, leading with insight for personal learning development pathways, and understanding how we can prepare for those next generation leaders. And this isn't just DDI sharing our perspective and insights with you, but we have customers that are also going to be sharing insights based upon the initiatives that they've driven around building tomorrow's leaders for today, understanding how we build that bench strength, and then the leadership purpose and alignment with the people strategy as we go. So there's a link in your additional resources to what that summit is. It's in Phoenix, Arizona this year. And I encourage you to check that out if that's something of interest to you. So we only have a couple minutes left, so we'll turn it over to open it up for any questions that we might have.
Hey, Kevin, there's one that came in as part of setting an assessment strategy. Can you share from your experience, how do you ensure that a leadership framework and a standard or consistent definition is used across the organization?
It's a great question. I'll kick off, and Scott, you can certainly chime in. I mean, the way that you ensure it is by open and consistent communication. We talked about senior leadership and a sponsor that can help to drive this. One of the situations I worked on with a customer that was highly effective was we had that senior sponsor who was the CEO kick off and send out a video to the entire organization on saying, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and here's what it looks like. Let's not try to keep this as a mystical thing behind closed curtains. Here's what the framework looks like. Here's what it means to you. So here's what you can expect in your roles. And they would cascade information about what the framework is, what were the tools that people were going to be experiencing and going through. So it demystified it for them and then just helped to create consistent understanding. The last piece I'd say is it's not a one-time deal. It needs to be consistent communication over an extended period of time to help reinforce what this thing is, what value it's going to be to me and the organization so that I can buy into understanding what my role is then with intersecting with it.
And I would just emphasize, Kevin, if you don't already have one, build a leadership framework that operationalizes what does effective leadership look like in your organization. And that's the true north for your assessment strategy and so many other talent systems.
Maybe one quick question, if you can share an example of how assessments are used as part of a leadership development program.
I worked with a customer a couple of years ago where they focused on, it was for a frontline leader program coming in. And this is for people who are coming new in from the outside of the organization, as well as leaders from within the organization, individual contributors. And they used an assessment on the front end. It was a kind of a day in the life type of assessment for a frontline leader that helped to identify, one, who are they selecting, also informed their immediate onboarding into their role, as well as then there was a defined 9-month track for all new leaders to go through for learning and development. They then wrap that up after a year with a 360 to reflect back on, hey, what did we just go through, and are the skills that I was focusing on developing on, what does it look like for me today? So I know that was a very quick hit, but that's one where there was 2 assessments that were built in conjunction with a learning program where they went through a defined criteria, series of content to help fill some of their leadership gaps.
I'll also add in, Kevin, I've seen organizations use an upfront assessment like that and use it to, one, help to inform the topics that they're developing their leaders on, so as almost a needs analysis, and 2, it allows for a parallel track. So while people are going through a group level development program, they can also be working on an individualized development plan. So that really plays nice together as well.
Yep. I know that there's a lot of other questions that we were not able to get to, and for time purposes, I know that people are dropping off. We will be responding and following up with you as you have questions following this webinar, but I do appreciate all of the open dialogue that you had along the way, and hopefully this was helpful insights for you as you go forward.
Thanks all.
Thank you.